The North Atlantic could swallow ships whole under a sunless sky, yet the Vikings sailed it. Their secret might have been a legendary crystal, the Viking Sunstone. This is the story of a device said to pierce total darkness and guide ships through impossible gloom. By the end, you will grasp how a simple stone could rewrite our understanding of ancient exploration. We will decipher clues from a 1,000-year-old saga, uncover the hidden physics of light that makes it possible, and see if modern science can prove it worked. How does a civilization master a force of nature it cannot even see? That single word in an ancient text is the spark that ignited this entire mystery. The Rothelfsþátr, a saga written down in 13th century Iceland, holds our most direct clue. In its pages, a man named Sigurd is described using a solarstein, a sunstone, to find the sun's position through a dense, overcast sky. It is not a detailed instruction manual. It is a passing mention, a casual detail in a larger story, which makes it all the more fascinating. Why include such a specific tool if it held no meaning for the audience? Viking sagas were not pure history books, nor were they pure fantasy. They were a tapestry woven from oral tradition, heroic deeds, cultural memory, and the values of the people who told them. A mention of a navigational device in this context suggests it was a recognizable concept, something the listeners would understand as part of the world of skilled seafarers. This is where our detective work truly begins. We have no sunstone labeled in a museum case. We have a whisper from the past, a legend born from the undeniable reality of Viking achievement. Their ships reached Greenland, Iceland, and even the shores of North America centuries before Columbus, across some of the most treacherous waters on Earth. They did this without magnetic compasses, which were not in use in Europe at the time. The saga's brief reference is a puzzle piece that promises to explain the inexplicable. It transforms the sunstone from a possible myth into a compelling question. If it was just a story, why does it fit so perfectly into the gap in our understanding? The legend persists because it addresses a very real and impressive historical feat. So we hold this literary clue fragile and open to interpretation, and we ask the next logical question. What in the natural world could possibly function as such a stone? The answer lies not in folklore, but in the hidden behavior of light itself. Light itself holds a secret map, invisible to our eyes. To see what the Vikings might have seen, we need to understand a property of light called polarization. Think of a light wave not just as brightness, but as a vibration. Normally, sunlight vibrates in all directions as it travels, but when it scatters through the molecules of our atmosphere, something fascinating happens. That scattered light becomes organized, vibrating predominantly in one plane, one direction. This is polarized light. On a clear day, the pattern of polarization in the sky forms a giant, symmetrical bullseye centered on the sun. Even when thick clouds hide the sun itself, this organized pattern of polarized light still penetrates the gloom. Our eyes lack the natural ability to detect this directional vibration, but the natural world is full of materials that can. Certain crystals possess a unique property. They can filter this polarized light, changing in brightness or color depending on how they are held relative to the hidden pattern in the sky. This is the core of the sky compass theory. By rotating a suitable crystal and observing these subtle changes, a skilled observer could theoretically trace the polarization pattern back to its source. They could pinpoint the sun's azimuth, its horizontal position, even when the sun itself was completely obscured. It is a form of navigation that uses the very fabric of daylight as its guide, a method completely independent of stars or magnets. For a culture that mastered the sea under the world's most challenging skies, this would have been a profound tool. It turns the entire overcast dome of the heavens into a subtle but readable dial. The concept feels almost magical, a sixth sense granted by a stone, yet it is grounded in very real, measurable physics. The question then becomes not if such a thing is possible, but what kind of crystal from the Viking world could perform this delicate task. The crystal's secret lies in a remarkable property known as birefringence. This is the real-world magic that makes a sky compass possible. Think of a birefringent crystal not as a simple window, but as a kind of light splitter. When a beam of ordinary light enters it, the crystal does something extraordinary. It divides that single beam into two separate rays. These two rays are polarized at right angles to each other, and they travel through the crystal at slightly different speeds. This speed difference is the heart of the entire mechanism. Now, imagine you are holding a clear, translucent piece of such a crystal up to a uniformly gray, overcast sky. At first, it might just look like a cloudy piece of glass, but then you begin to slowly rotate it. As you turn the stone, the two internal rays interfere with each other in a way that changes how much light exits the crystal to your eye. In certain positions, the crystal will appear to darken. In others, it will brighten. That subtle shift in brightness is the signal. The point of maximum darkness or maximum brightness corresponds directly to the hidden polarization pattern in the sky, which in turn points back to the sun's position. For a Viking navigator, the process would have been one of patient observation. Holding the stone steady, they would rotate it carefully, watching for that telltale dimming against the gloom. The clearest natural candidate for this task is a crystal called Iceland Spar, a beautifully transparent form of calcite. The Vikings had access to this material through trade and travel. Another strong possibility is Cordierite, a stone sometimes called Viking's compass, which shifts from a yellow-gray to a deep blue depending on how it is held against polarized light. The genius of the method is its simplicity. It requires no complex machinery, just a keen eye, a steady hand, and an intimate understanding of the sky's hidden language. This was not about seeing the sun, it was about reading the sun's signature etched into the very light it produced. With this principle in hand, we move from theory to tangible proof. Could such a stone truly guide a ship across an ocean? Yet for all the compelling theory, a profound silence echoes from the ground. Not a single, definitive Viking sunstone has ever been unearthed by archaeologists. We have the Saga's whisper and the crystal's clear physics, but the tangible object, the artifact itself, remains stubbornly absent. This is the great archaeological void at the heart of the mystery. Without that physical proof, the sunstone risks floating forever in the realm of intriguing possibility. So where is it? The search for an answer reveals just how fragile our connection to the past can be. Consider what typically survives in a Viking burial or settlement. We find swords rusted but recognizable, brooches, beads, tools of iron and bone. These are durable materials, objects of clear status or daily function. A small, clear crystal, however, presents a different story. If it was a practical tool for a living navigator, not a symbol of status, it may never have been placed in a grave at all. It could have been passed from hand to hand, ship to ship, until it was lost, broken, or simply discarded. Even if one were buried over centuries in damp soil, a calcite crystal like Iceland Spar can dissolve, leaving no trace for a modern excavator to find. The most tantalizing clue comes not from a Viking longship but from a much later wreck. In 2003, marine archaeologists exploring the Alderney, an English warship that sank in the late 16th century, made a remarkable discovery. Among the cannons and rigging, they recovered a small, rectangular block of Iceland Spar. It was found near the ship's navigation table. For a moment, it seemed like a smoking gun. Here was a crystal with proven optical properties, located precisely where you would expect a navigational aid to be, on a ship sailing over 300 years after the Viking Age. But is it conclusive proof for the Vikings? Not quite. It strongly suggests that the knowledge of using such crystals for navigation persisted in European seafaring tradition long after the magnetic compass became common. It shows the idea was not just a saga writer's fantasy, but a practiced technique. This artifact is a powerful bridge, but it does not by itself place the stone in a Viking navigator's hand. It tells us the concept was real, but it cannot confirm its origin. This frustrating absence forces researchers down a different, fascinating path. When the Earth will not give up its secrets, we must recreate them. This is where the story moves from digging in the soil to testing on the open sea, in the field of experimental archaeology. A laboratory theory is one thing, but the real-world sky is a different challenge entirely. Could a person, not just a sensor, actually use a crystal to find the sun on a gloomy day? In 2011, a team of scientists decided to find out. Their experiment was elegantly simple and profoundly significant. They took a clear, rhomboid-shaped piece of Iceland spar, the very crystal long suspected, and went outside under a completely overcast sky. The sun was a hidden disk, invisible to the naked eye. One researcher held the stone up and began to slowly rotate it, watching for the telltale dimming effect caused by its birefringent properties. The goal was to mark the direction where the crystal appeared darkest, a line that should point toward the sun's azimuth. They repeated this process many times, carefully recording each measurement. Then they checked their results against the sun's actual known position, calculated from precise astronomical data. The outcome was startling. Using nothing but the crystal and their own observation, they were able to pinpoint the sun's location to within a few degrees of accuracy. That is a margin of error smaller than the width of your thumb held at arm's length. For navigational purposes across an open ocean, this level of precision is more than sufficient. A Viking shipmaster who knew his starting point and could consistently take such readings could maintain a remarkably straight course, even during days of extended cloud cover. This study did something monumental. It moved the Sunstone from the pages of Saga and the whiteboard of physics directly into the realm of practical, proven technique. It demonstrated that the method is not only physically sound but also humanly achievable. No advanced technology was needed, just the right crystal and the knowledge of how to use it. The 2011 experiment provided the crucial link that archaeology had not yet found. It answered the fundamental question of feasibility. The legend now had a working blueprint, yet a successful test in a controlled modern setting invites the next, more difficult question. Could this tool have carried a longship across the vast and violent North Atlantic? But the most legendary claim pushes the Sunstone into the realm of the supernatural, navigation in total darkness. This is the ultimate test of the theory, moving beyond overcast days into the deep twilight of the northern latitudes, or under the eerie glow of the midnight sun when the sun skirts the horizon but never truly sets. Here, the challenge transforms. The sky is not merely cloudy, it is profoundly dim, a world of deep blues and purples where the sun itself has vanished below the horizon. Could the Sunstone's magic still work? The answer, once again, lies in the stubborn persistence of polarized light. Researchers studying this phenomenon have mapped a fascinating pattern that emerges in the twilight sky. They call it the Brandenburg Gate pattern. Imagine the sky as a vast dome. Even after sunset, a distinct band of polarized light forms a great arch across the heavens like a celestial gate. This arch is aligned with the position of the sun, even though the sun is now hidden from view. For a navigator holding a sensitive crystal like Cordierite, which changes color rather than just brightness, this arch could theoretically still be detected as a subtle shift in hue against the twilight gloom. The key word is theoretically. This is where we separate plausible daily use from the edges of mythical exaggeration. Using a sunstone in the deep twilight or under the weak, low sun of an Arctic summer would have been an act of supreme skill and patience. It would demand not just a crystal, but a navigator's deeply ingrained mental map of how the sky's gradients behave at different times of year and latitude. They would need to interpret faint, fading signals. Could it be done, perhaps by the most experienced masters of the sea, those who had spent a lifetime reading the whispers of the sky? It moves the tool from a reliable instrument for cloudy days to the ultimate emergency device, a last resort for maintaining direction when every other visual reference had melted into the long polar night. This extreme scenario highlights the true nature of Viking navigation. It was never about one single gadget. The Sunstone, if it existed as this optical tool, would have been part of a larger, sophisticated system. A system that leads us to the final, crucial element, the human mind that held the stone. A crystal alone could not conquer an ocean. The true genius of Viking navigation lay in combining specialized tools with a profound, living awareness of the sea itself. Think of the Sunstone not as a magic wand, but as one vital piece in a sophisticated mental toolkit. On a long voyage, a navigator would have relied on a method called dead reckoning, estimating their position based on a previously known point, their speed, and the direction traveled. The Sunstone provided that crucial directional fix when the sky was a featureless gray. But direction is only half the puzzle. To know how far north or south they were, the Vikings likely used another ingenious device mentioned in later texts, the sun shadow board. Imagine a wooden disc floating in a bowl of water to keep it level. At its center, a gnomon, a small vertical pin, cast a shadow. At local noon, when the sun reached its highest point, the navigator would measure the length of that shadow. A longer shadow meant the sun was lower in the sky, indicating a higher latitude farther north. A shorter shadow meant the sun was higher, suggesting a more southerly position. This simple tool, used in tandem with the Sunstone's azimuth reading, gave them a two-dimensional fix, a primitive but effective form of celestial navigation. Yet even these tools were supported by something far more ancient and intuitive, a deep literacy in the language of the natural world. A skilled navigator watched everything. The flight patterns of seabirds could indicate the direction to land. Specific cloud formations often lingered over islands. Even the swell of the ocean, the dominant wave pattern created by prevailing winds, served as a constant directional guide. On a foggy day, they might have felt the rhythm of the waves against the hull to maintain course. This was wayfinding in its purest form, a continuous conversation between the sailor and his environment. The Sunstone was the technological breakthrough for the most difficult conditions, but it was the navigator's accumulated wisdom, his mental map of currents, stars, and bird migrations, that gave the stone its true meaning. It was the keystone in an arch of knowledge, essential but incomplete without the supporting pillars of experience. This holistic view shifts our understanding from a search for a single legendary object to an appreciation of an entire intellectual tradition. It begs a final, poignant question: what happened to this remarkable system of knowledge when the world itself began to change? The stone was not a thinking machine, it was a silent partner in conversation. All its subtle whispers of dimming light or shifting hue meant nothing without a mind trained to listen. The Viking navigator was the true instrument, a master of observation whose skill transformed a crystal's faint signal into a course across an ocean. Using the Sunstone was an art of profound patience and physical discipline. Picture the scene on the deck of a longship, the world reduced to a gray void of sea and sky. The navigator, perhaps sheltering the crystal from spray, holds it up steadily. His hands must be calm, his focus absolute. He slowly rotates the stone, not once, but many times, his eyes searching for that precise angle where the view through the crystal grows darkest or brightest. This was not a quick glance, it was a meticulous calibration. He would need to account for the time of day and year, knowing intuitively how the sun's hidden path should arch across the sky. The faint signal from the crystal did not shout an answer. It offered a clue that he then cross-referenced with his entire mental library of the sea. How long had they been sailing on this heading? What was the feel of the current against the hull? What did the behavior of the clouds or the type of seabird overhead suggest? The Sunstone's reading was a single data point woven into a vast, living tapestry of environmental awareness. This knowledge was not written in a book. It was carried in memory and muscle, passed from an experienced sailor to an apprentice through years of shared voyages. A young crewman would learn by watching, by doing, by listening to the old masters interpret the wind and waves long before he ever held a sacred crystal. The tool did not create the expert created the purpose for the tool. In this light, the Sunstone emerges not as a standalone gadget, but as the most refined extension of the navigator's own senses. It focused his innate ability to read the world, giving him a precise method to decode the one signal, polarized light, that his eyes could not naturally perceive. The true technology was the generations of accumulated wisdom, the cultural brain trust that turned observation into reliable passage. This human factor is what elevates the story from a physics puzzle to a testament of human ingenuity. It also leads us to a quieter, more poignant question. What happens when such a specialized art form meets a changing world, when the very need for its exquisite subtlety begins to fade away? The legend of the Sunstone is a powerful story, but history demands we separate plausible tools from poetic myth. We must weigh the evidence with a clear eye, acknowledging both the compelling arguments for its use and the significant gaps that remain. On one side of the scale, we have the undeniable reality of Viking achievement. Their voyages were not accidents, they were repeated, successful expeditions across some of the most challenging seas on the planet. The 2011 experiment proved conclusively that the optical method works. A person with a crystal can find the sun through thick cloud. This gives the Saga mention a solid foundation in real-world physics. It transforms the Sunstone from a magical item into a potential piece of sophisticated technology, a tool born from acute observation of the natural world. Furthermore, the discovery of the Iceland Spar crystal on the 16th century Alderney wreck shows that the knowledge of using such stones for navigation persisted in European maritime culture long after the Viking Age. It was a real technique, not a fictional invention, yet the other side of the scale holds substantial weight. The most glaring absence is the lack of a single, verified Sunstone artifact from a Viking context. If these were common navigational tools, why have none been found in graves, settlements, or even as stray losses? Their absence suggests that if they were used, they might have been rare, specialized objects, perhaps belonging only to the most elite navigators. Their fragile, organic nature or simple dissolution over time could also explain the void. Then there is the Saga itself. Could the mention of the Solarstein be metaphorical? A literary device to highlight a character's wisdom or connection to the divine, rather than a literal description of a tool. It is a possibility we cannot dismiss. The reference is brief and stands alone, leaving its interpretation forever open. This search for balance leads us to another intriguing artifact, the Uunartoq Disc. Found in a Norse settlement in Greenland, this wooden fragment has a series of notches carved along its edge and a central hole. Some researchers propose it was a bearing dial, a kind of primitive compass card. The theory suggests that a navigator could have used a sunstone to find the sun's azimuth, then aligned a central gnomon or shadow pin on the disc to cast a shadow along the notched bearing, effectively locking in a course to steer by. It is a fascinating idea, the Sunstone providing the direction and the disc providing a physical memory of that heading. Yet the Uunartoq Disc is also fragmentary and its purpose debated. Could it have been a simple decorative spindle whorl or a tool for something else entirely? Its tantalizing ambiguity mirrors the entire Sunstone debate. So where does this leave us? The most reasonable conclusion is not a definitive yes or no, but a spectrum of possibility. The Sunstone likely was not a ubiquitous gadget on every Viking ship. It was probably a specialized instrument, part of an advanced navigator's toolkit, used in the most difficult conditions when the sky offered no other clues. Its use would have required immense skill, making it a rare and valued form of knowledge. This view reconciles the evidence. It explains why the physics works, why the Saga mentions it, and yet why we have not found dozens of them. It places the Sunstone at the pinnacle of Viking wayfinding, a secret weapon for the darkest days, rather than an everyday compass. The mystery endures because the Vikings left us a puzzle made of whispers and shadows, where a single, clear answer may forever lie just beyond the horizon of our understanding. The ocean has always been the ultimate frontier, and every great seafaring culture faced the same essential puzzle. To truly appreciate the Viking Sunstone, we must lift our gaze beyond the fjords of Scandinavia and see it as part of a much larger human story. Across the vast blue expanse of our planet, other civilizations were solving the riddle of open water navigation with equally brilliant and often strikingly similar ingenuity. In the Pacific, the Polynesian voyagers achieved what many thought impossible. They settled islands scattered across millions of square miles of open ocean, a realm far vaster than the North Atlantic, without any magnetic compass or written charts. Their system was one of supreme environmental literacy. They memorized the star compass, a mental map of where specific stars rose and set on the horizon, serving as fixed directional beacons. They watched the subtle patterns of ocean swells, feeling how the hull responded to deep, rolling waves that reflected off distant islands. They observed the flight of birds, the color of the water, and even the types of clouds that gathered over land. This was wayfinding as a complete science, a holistic reading of nature where every ripple and breeze carried meaning. Their success proves that long-distance navigation was achievable through observation and deep knowledge alone. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea, Arab traders developed their own sophisticated tools. They used the camel, a simple but brilliant device. It was a small rectangular board with a string tied through its center. The navigator would hold the string to their eye and slide the board toward or away from their face until its edges precisely lined up with the horizon and a specific guide star, like the North Star. By measuring the length of the string, they could determine their latitude, their north-south position. This tool, alongside detailed written sailing directions known as romangs, allowed for precise trade routes from East Africa to India. In China, celestial navigation was advanced early on, with star charts and the early recognition of the magnetic compass's properties, though its maritime use came later. And then there is the lodestone, a naturally magnetic piece of the mineral magnetite. Its mysterious power to point north was known in ancient China, the Islamic world, and Europe long before it was mounted on a card and placed in a box to become the mariner's compass. The lore of directional stones is a global thread. Placing the Viking Sunstone within this worldwide tapestry does something remarkable. It transforms it from an isolated Nordic curiosity into a local expression of a universal human endeavor. Different cultures, facing the same terrifying emptiness of the open sea, arrived at different technological solutions, yet all were rooted in the same principles: careful observation of the heavens, the waves, and the wind, and the creative use of available materials, whether it was a knotted string, a wooden board, or a clear crystal. The concept of using a stone, be it a magnetic lodestone or an optical sunstone, to reveal hidden truths about direction, emerges as a powerful parallel. It suggests that when human curiosity meets a survival challenge, innovation can follow surprisingly convergent paths. This global context does not diminish the Viking achievement, it elevates it. It shows they were participating in a grand, age-old conversation between humanity and the ocean, contributing their own unique and elegant answer to a question asked by sailors everywhere: how do we find our way when all landmarks vanish? 3 crystals emerge as the most likely heroes of this story. Each one possesses the unique optical gift needed to read the sky's hidden language, and each has a compelling connection to the Viking world. By holding them up to the light, we move from abstract theory to the tangible feel of stone in a navigator's hand. The first and perhaps strongest candidate is Iceland Spar, a beautifully transparent form of the mineral calcite. Its name gives away its geographic connection, with significant deposits found in Iceland and Scandinavia. This crystal is the laboratory favorite because its birefringence is exceptionally strong. When you look through a clear piece of Iceland Spar, you see a double image, a testament to how powerfully it splits light. For navigation, this property means the dimming effect as you rotate the stone is pronounced and relatively easy to observe, even under challenging gray skies. It is a precise, sensitive instrument made by nature. Then there is Cordierite, often called Viking's compass or sunstone in modern gemology. This crystal offers a different kind of signal. Instead of just changing in brightness, certain types of Cordierite dramatically shift color when rotated against polarized light, moving from a pale yellow-gray to a deep, vivid blue. This color change could provide a stark, clear indicator in the right conditions, perhaps easier for a tired eye to detect than a subtle shift in grayness. Notably, Cordierite is found in Norway, squarely within the Norse homelands, making local acquisition plausible. The third contender is tourmaline, another polarizing crystal with deposits known in Sweden and Norway. While it shares the necessary light-filtering property, its signals can be more complex and it is often less transparent than the other two, potentially making it harder to use for precise sky readings. So which stone was the true sunstone? The answer might not be a single choice. Consider the practical reality of a long voyage. Weather conditions are never constant. The deep gloom of a North Atlantic storm presents a different challenge than the hazy twilight of an Arctic summer. A navigator, valuing his life and his ship, might have carried more than one type of crystal. Iceland Spar, with its strong, clear dimming effect, could have been the primary tool for thick, overcast days. Cordierite, with its dramatic color shift, might have been reserved for special conditions or used as a confirming check when light levels were very low. This toolkit approach makes profound sense. It turns the navigator from a person dependent on one magic object into a skilled technician selecting the right instrument for the job, much like a carpenter chooses a specific saw or chisel. The material science behind these stones is not just a dry analysis, it is the key to understanding their daily use. A crystal that is too small becomes difficult to hold steady and read accurately. One that is too thick or included with flaws could scatter light and muddy the signal. The ideal sunstone would be a palm-sized, clear, well-formed piece, carefully selected and perhaps even shaped by a knowledgeable craftsman. It was not a random pebble picked up on a beach, it was a purposefully chosen piece of technology. By examining these candidates, the legend gains weight and texture. We can almost feel the cool, smooth surface of the calcite, or watch the Cordierite flash from gray to blue in a trained hand. This brings us to the physical reality of the tool, and to the person who mastered it, the navigator whose skill gave the silent stone its voice. But even the clearest crystal meets its match in the heaviest sky. The physics of polarized light presents a formidable hurdle: cloud density itself. Scientific research into atmospheric optics reveals a critical limitation for any sky compass. While thin, high cirrus clouds scatter sunlight and actually enhance polarization patterns, the thick, low blanket of a North Atlantic storm is a different beast. Dense nimbostratus clouds and especially fog act like a diffuse filter, scattering light so many times that the organized polarization signal becomes scrambled and weakens dramatically. In the deepest gloom, the subtle dimming or color shift a navigator sought might simply vanish into a uniform gray. So was the Sunstone rendered useless in the very conditions it was supposedly designed for. This realistic appraisal is essential for understanding its true role. It likely was not a magic bullet for navigating the heart of a howling gale, where visibility dropped to near zero and survival depended on seamanship, not celestial fixes. Instead, its greatest value probably lay in those far more common marginal conditions: the persistent haze, the high overcast, the days of featureless gray that could last for weeks in the northern seas. These were the conditions that could slowly disorient a crew over time, where the sun was a hidden presence but not completely erased. In such frequent hazes, enough polarized light could still penetrate for a skilled user to get a reading, to re-establish a lost bearing or confirm a suspected course. This reframes the tool not as a storm weapon, but as a precision instrument for maintaining direction during the long, dull, and dangerously ambiguous periods between storms. It was the tool that fought the creeping doubt, not the screaming wind. This honest assessment of its weather limits actually makes its inclusion in the Navigator's toolkit more logical, not less. It was a specialized device for a specific and common navigational problem, not a mythical all-weather solution. And if the sky itself could sometimes fail the stone, what other natural phenomena could a master navigator use to cross-check his course? A tool for the sea could also be a key to the cosmos. To understand the Sunstone fully, we must look past its practical function and into the world of Norse belief, where every natural force had a story and every object could hold a deeper power. In their mythology, the sun and moon were not simply lights in the sky. They were beings chased eternally by wolves, Skirl and Hati. The idea of capturing a piece of the sun's essence within a stone, of holding its hidden light in your hand, resonates with a profound mythic theme: the human desire to master a fundamental force of nature. This was not just physics, it was poetry written in crystal. For a Viking navigator, the line between skill and divine favor was often thin. A successful voyage required more than knowledge, it required luck or the blessing of the gods. In this mindset, a tool that revealed the hidden sun could easily be seen as more than a clever device. It might have been considered a talisman, a physical token of Odin's wisdom, or a gift from the gods of the sea and sky. The navigator using it was not just a technician, he was an intermediary interpreting divine signs etched into the very fabric of light. We see this intertwining of the practical and the spiritual throughout Norse material culture. Consider other luminous artifacts from their world, like the pieces of glowing, heat-treated quartz sometimes found in graves, or the polished sun discs that may have been used in ceremonial practices. These objects suggest a cultural fascination with capturing and manipulating light, attributing to it both practical and symbolic power. The Sunstone fits perfectly within this tradition. It was likely both a precision instrument and a powerful cultural icon, its value doubled by its utility and its meaning. Using it required a cool, observant mind, but trusting it on a voyage into the unknown may have required a kind of faith. This duality is what makes the artifact so compelling. It represents a point where empirical observation and spiritual belief were not in conflict, but in conversation. The navigator reading the crystal was simultaneously solving a mathematical problem and participating in an ancient story, one where humanity sought to outwit the wolves of chaos and bring order to a vast, dark sea. This cultural layer does not diminish the scientific ingenuity, it enriches it, showing how innovation is often woven from both reason and reverence. And if the stone held such layered significance for the society that might have used it, its eventual disappearance becomes an even greater historical loss, a fading of both a technology and a worldview. A laboratory is a world of controlled stillness, but the deck of a longship is a place of constant, chaotic motion. To move the Sunstone from theory into history, researchers had to take it to sea. Advanced experimental archaeology demanded not just simulating the sky, but the entire physical reality of a Viking voyage. Teams embarked on small boats in northern waters, armed with replica crystals of Iceland Spar and Cordierite, determined to answer a visceral question. Could you actually use this thing when the world would not hold still? The challenges were immediate and profound. The first enemy was the human hand itself. A slight tremor, invisible on land, becomes a wild oscillation when amplified by the pitch and roll of a vessel. Holding the crystal steady enough to detect a subtle dimming against a shifting sky was an exercise in physical endurance and focus. Then came the sea spray, a fine mist that could coat the crystal's surface, distorting the light and blurring the very signal they sought. The horizon itself, that crucial reference line, was no longer a stable flat plane but a tilting, heaving curve. Every condition designed to frustrate precise observation was present. These experiments stripped away any romantic notion of the Sunstone as an easy solution. They revealed it as a tool demanding supreme skill. The results from such sea trials have been mixed yet deeply informative. Success was possible, but it was inconsistent and heavily dependent on the navigator's steadiness and the severity of the conditions. A bearing could be taken, but it was a slow, deliberate process, not a quick glance. This critical insight reshapes our understanding of its likely role. The Sunstone probably was not used for minute-by-minute steering, with a navigator constantly squinting at the crystal while shouting course corrections. That would have been impractical, if not impossible, for long stretches. Instead, its true value may have emerged in a more periodic, strategic way. Imagine the scenario. After hours of sailing under a featureless sky, using the feel of the swell and the wind to maintain a general direction, the navigator would seek a moment of relative calm. Perhaps during a lull in the wind or by bracing themselves carefully against the mast, they would bring out the stone. This was not for constant correction, but for verification. It was a celestial checkpoint. By taking a careful bearing, they could answer a silent, gnawing question. Have we begun to drift? The reading from the crystal, compared against their mental dead reckoning, would either confirm they were true or reveal a subtle error that had crept in over miles. This practice transforms the tool from a steering wheel into a compass used at key intervals, a way to reset the mental map and ensure that the slow, accumulating error of guesswork did not doom the voyage. It highlights a navigation system built on layers of redundancy, where the Sunstone provided the precious, occasional absolute reference that kept all other estimates honest. The very difficulty of using it at sea makes this intermittent role the most convincing. It was a master's technique deployed at crucial moments to silence doubt and realign the ship with the hidden path of the sun. The legend of the Sunstone refused to sync with the longships. It found a new home in the modern world, not in archaeology journals, but in the pages of adventure novels and on glowing screens. This journey from scholarly hypothesis to pop culture icon is a story in itself, revealing how a tantalizing historical mystery can fuel endless imagination. One of its earliest and most famous appearances came from the father of science fiction, Jules Verne. In his novel The Adventures of Captain Hatteras, published in 1866, Verne gave the Sunstone a starring role. His fictional explorers, trapped in the polar night, use an Iceland Spar crystal to locate the hidden sun and save themselves from despair. Verne took the core concept and wrapped it in high drama, presenting the stone not just as a tool but as a lifeline. This set a template that would be followed for over a century, transforming the Sunstone from a potential navigational aid into a guaranteed plot device for any story involving lost explorers or ancient secrets. Much later, best-selling author Clive Cussler wove the Sunstone into the fabric of a modern thriller. In his novel Valhalla Rising, Cussler's hero Dirk Pitt uncovers a sunstone as part of a larger puzzle tied to Norse exploration, blending the crystal's lore with contemporary action and conspiracy. Here, the stone is often a key, a piece of a code left by a forgotten civilization, its true purpose magnified and mystified for maximum suspense. The adaptation did not stop with books. Video games, a medium built on interactive discovery, have eagerly embraced the Sunstone. In the vast world of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, players can literally acquire and use a Sunstone as part of their navigation toolkit while sailing the digital North Sea. It is presented as a real, functioning item within the game's historically inspired setting, teaching a new generation about the concept through direct, hands-on play. Other games use it as a magical artifact, a source of power or a necessary ingredient to unlock hidden realms, pushing its function fully into the realm of fantasy. Films and television series, too, have dabbled in its lore, often depicting it as a glowing, otherworldly crystal that grants supernatural guidance. This pop culture lifeblood is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is incredibly effective. These stories keep the Sunstone alive in the public consciousness, sparking curiosity in millions who might never encounter an academic paper. They introduce the romantic idea of Viking scientific ingenuity to audiences around the globe, framing history as an active, unsolved puzzle. A viewer might first see a sunstone in a game or a movie, and then fall down a rabbit hole of real research, which is a powerful form of engagement. Yet this very process inevitably blurs the lines. The nuanced, fragile, and debated artifact of history hardens into a cinematic certainty. The slow, difficult practice of taking a bearing on a heaving deck becomes an instant, glowing solution. The historical sunstone, if it existed, was a subtle interpreter of light. Pop culture often turns it into a radiant source of light. This exaggeration is not dishonesty. It is the nature of storytelling. Drama requires clarity and power, not academic hesitation. The result is a fascinating feedback loop. Scholarly theories inspire creative minds, whose amplified versions of those theories then shape public perception, which in turn fuels more public interest in the original scholarship. The Sunstone becomes a staple of the adventure genre precisely because its historical basis is just solid enough to feel plausible, yet just mysterious enough to allow for limitless invention. It sits perfectly at the crossroads of history and myth, a real-world object that feels like it was pulled from a legend. This enduring appeal shows that we are still captivated by the same core idea that fascinated the Saga writers: the human desire to find a fixed point in the chaos, to hold a piece of the sky in your hand and know definitively which way is home. The true value of a tool is measured by the doors it can open. For the Vikings, mastering the sky's hidden language with a crystal was not an academic exercise. It was a direct path to power and prosperity in a harsh, competitive world. Reliable navigation in poor weather translated into a profound economic and strategic advantage, one that could reshape the map of the North Atlantic. Consider the logistics of a trading voyage from Norway to the rich walrus ivory and fur markets of Greenland, or to the vital settlement in Iceland. A journey that might take weeks under clear skies could stretch into perilous months if a ship was repeatedly forced to halt or wander off course under dense cloud cover. Every extra day at sea consumed more supplies, exposed the crew to greater risk, and delayed the delivery of valuable goods. a navigator who could confidently maintain a true heading through the gloom effectively shortened the ocean. He turned unpredictable, dangerous crossings into more reliable, scheduled enterprises. This reliability was the bedrock of economic expansion. It allowed for the establishment and sustained supply of distant settlements, like those in Greenland and the fleeting outpost at Elands Orks Meadows in Newfoundland. These were not accidental landfalls, they were calculated ventures requiring repeated, successful round trips to survive. The ability to travel when others were weather-bound also created a formidable military edge. The legendary Viking raids relied on speed, surprise, and the ability to strike coastal targets before defenses could be organized. A fleet that could navigate a bank of sea fog, using a sunstone to hold formation and course, could appear as if from nowhere, achieving total tactical surprise. This was not just about bravery or battle axes, it was about information dominance, controlling the terms of engagement by mastering the environment itself. On a grander scale, consistent navigation secured control over emerging trade routes. The wealth of the Norse world flowed along these sea roads, from the silver of the Islamic world to the timber of the Baltic. The faction that could guarantee the safe passage of goods, the merchants who could deliver their cargoes first and most reliably, amassed immense influence. In this light, the Sunstone transforms from a clever navigational aid into a potential instrument of statecraft. It offered a tangible, technological edge in the fierce contest for resources and territory in the early medieval North. Its value was not merely in finding north, but in finding faster, safer, and more secretive ways to reach destinations that held wealth or strategic importance. This shifts our perspective entirely. We are no longer looking at a simple survival tool, but at a piece of infrastructure as critical to Norse expansion as the design of the longship itself. One enabled travel across the water, the other enabled precision upon it. Together, they formed a system that allowed a society from Scandinavia's fringe to project its power across an ocean, to build networks and legacies that would endure for centuries. The silence of the archaeological record on the Sunstone, then, becomes even more intriguing. If it was such a powerful advantage, why is its physical trace so faint? This leads us to consider the possibility that its greatest power may not have been in the crystal, but in the knowledge it represented, a form of capital so valuable it was protected, concealed, and ultimately lost to time. The arrival of the magnetic needle in Europe rewrote the rules of navigation, but its timing is a crucial clue. This technology, likely transmitted through trade routes from China via the Islamic world, began appearing in European texts and ship logs around the 12th century. This was well after the zenith of Viking exploration, which had largely concluded by the 11th century. This simple fact of chronology creates a fascinating technological vacuum. For centuries, the most ambitious open ocean sailors in Northern Europe operated without the tool we consider fundamental to seafaring. They were navigating a world without a magnetic north. So what does this mean for the Sunstone? If the Vikings truly used these crystals, they were not just employing a clever trick, they were utilizing a sophisticated optical compass centuries before the magnetic version became commonplace. This positions their potential innovation not as a primitive precursor, but as a parallel and perhaps equally advanced solution to the same eternal problem. It sparks a compelling debate among historians of technology. Were these two inventions entirely separate threads in human ingenuity, one born from observing light in the North Atlantic gloom, the other from noticing the strange pull of a lodestone? Or could there have been a subtle connection? One provocative theory suggests that the conceptual leap to using a directional tool, any tool that pointed the way, might have been paved by earlier practices. The idea of trusting a stone to reveal hidden directional information, whether through polarized light or magnetic force, could represent a shared cognitive step. Knowledge of using a lodestone for direction finding on land existed in many cultures. If Norse navigators were already accustomed to the idea of a solarstein, a stone that interpreted the sun, might they or their trading partners have been more receptive to the idea of a ladarstein, a leading stone that pointed to the pole? It is a tantalizing thought that the cultural acceptance of one stone might have eased the adoption of another. Yet the evidence for any direct lineage remains speculative, a ghost of a possibility. The more likely scenario is one of convergent evolution. Different environments demand different tools. The magnetic compass, while revolutionary, has its own weaknesses in the high north, where the magnetic pole creates significant declination, a misalignment between magnetic north and true north that can lead a sailor dangerously astray if not corrected. An optical sunstone, by contrast, always points to the true sun, offering a celestial fix immune to the Earth's magnetic quirks. This suggests the Viking method, if it existed, was not a dead end waiting to be replaced by a superior technology. It was a specialized, elegant solution perfectly adapted to its specific geographic and climatic niche. It solved the problem of the overcast northern sea in a way the early magnetic compass alone could not. The broader history of technology is not always a straight line of progress, where the new instantly obliterates the old. It is often a story of overlapping tools, where old methods persist because they still work best for certain people in certain places. The Sunstone, therefore, stands not as a forgotten failure, but as a testament to a different kind of brilliance, a reminder that there can be more than one path across the same dark water. Perhaps the Sunstone's most sophisticated application was not simply pointing the way, but charting a course across the grid of the Earth itself. Viking navigation is often painted as cautious coastal piloting, but their journeys to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland were undeniable open ocean crossings. To achieve these feats, they may have employed a technique known as latitude sailing. This is a brilliant mental shift in navigation strategy. Instead of trying to follow a complex, curved great circle route, a latitude sailor aims for a simpler goal. They find a specific line of east-west latitude, and then do everything in their power to sail along that single line until they hit their destination. Think of it like walking a tightrope stretched across the ocean. Your only job is to stay on that rope, not to veer north or south of it. For a Viking ship departing Norway for the southern coast of Iceland, the strategy would be clear. First, you sail north or south from your starting point until you reach the known latitude of your target. Then, you turn west and do everything you can to maintain that exact latitude all the way across the sea. But how do you know you are on the right line, and how do you stay on it? This is where our two tools, the Sunstone and the Shadow Board, could have worked in powerful concert. At local noon, when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, a navigator would have two critical tasks. Using a sunstone, he could determine the sun's precise azimuth, its bearing along the horizon. This told him if he was facing true east-west, or if his ship had drifted north or south of his intended line. Simultaneously, he would use a sun shadow board. This was likely a wooden disc with a central pin, floated in a bowl of water to keep it level. By measuring the length of the pin's shadow at noon, he could determine the sun's altitude. A longer shadow meant a lower sun, indicating a higher latitude farther north. A shorter shadow meant a higher sun, placing him farther south. This noon measurement gave him a numerical fix, a snapshot of his position on the north-south grid. The real genius lies in combining these readings. The shadow board tells him, we are at this specific latitude. The sunstone's azimuth reading tells him, our bow is pointing this way relative to the sun's path. Are we sailing parallel to our latitude or across it? By correcting his heading based on the sunstone's guidance, he could theoretically crab his way westward, constantly adjusting to stay on that invisible line. This sounds remarkably advanced, and it raises a profound question. Did Viking navigators perform complex trigonometric calculations in their heads, or did they rely on something more intuitive? The evidence suggests a system built on experience and rule of thumb, not abstract math. A master navigator would not think in degrees and minutes, he thought in body knowledge. He knew that to reach the good pastures of Iceland, the noon shadow on a certain day of summer should be exactly as long as the width of his hand. He had memorized these key measurements for different destinations at different times of the year, a living database passed down through apprenticeship. The Sunstone, in this context, was the fine-tuning dial. The shadow board gave the gross latitude. The Sunstone provided the precise directional control to maintain it. This transforms the Sunstone from a simple compass substitute into the steering mechanism for a much grander navigational computer, the human mind trained by generations of oceanic observation. It suggests a level of deliberate, repeatable precision in their longest voyages that moves far beyond luck or drifting. They were not just hoping to hit land, they were sailing a calculated line, using the hidden sun as their guide rail across the vast and empty blue. A compelling story deserves its sharpest critics. To truly weigh the evidence for the Viking Sunstone, we must listen carefully to the voices of skepticism, for they ask the difficult questions that separate romance from reality. Some historians propose a simpler, less technological reading of the saga itself. Could the word solarstein in the Roðolf's Þátta be something other than a crystal compass? One alternative interpretation suggests it might refer to a simple sundial, a known tool for marking the sun's passage on land, its mention in a sea story perhaps being metaphorical, a symbol of a character's wisdom or divine insight rather than a literal report of a navigational technique. The sagas are rich with such symbolism, and a modern reader eager for ancient technology might be projecting a meaning the original audience never intended. This literary critique reminds us that our primary source is not a technical manual, but a story, and stories serve many masters beyond historical accuracy. Beyond the text, a broader navigational argument arises. Critics rightly point to the immense, proven skill of Viking seafarers using methods we know they possessed. Their deep knowledge of coastal landmarks, bird flight patterns, ocean swells, and star positions was a complete system in itself. On many voyages, especially the shorter hops between the Shetlands, Orkneys, and Norway, a master pilot might never have needed a specialized tool for overcast days. He could simply wait for a break in the weather or use the feel of the dominant swell as a steady guide. The extraordinary long-distance journeys to Greenland and Vinland, while rare, could have been achieved by a combination of exceptional stellar observation on clear nights and a significant amount of calculated risk-taking, accepting that some degree of drift was inevitable and correctable upon sighting known birds or changes in sea color. From this perspective, the Sunstone becomes an unnecessary complication, a solution in search of a problem that skilled sailors had already solved through experience and grit. This viewpoint forces us to confront a potential bias in our own modern fascination. Are we, with our love for neat technological explanations, unwilling to grant ancient people the full credit for their sheer observational genius? Could our desire to find a secret weapon be blinding us to the more profound truth that their greatest tool was a cultivated, lifelong intimacy with the natural world? Even the promising field of experimental archaeology is not immune to this critique. Skeptics question whether modern experiments, however well-intentioned, can ever escape a form of confirmation bias. The researchers know what result they are hoping for. The person holding the replica crystal knows they are trying to find the sun. This conscious intent could subtly influence how they interpret the faint, subjective signal of the stone's dimming, perhaps unconsciously favoring the rotation that aligns with the known correct answer. In the controlled environment of an experiment, the participant is a scientist testing a hypothesis. On a Viking longship, the navigator was a survivor trusting his life to a reading. That chasm of context is almost impossible to bridge in a field test. The pressure, the fear, the fatigue, the spray, the doubt, these are variables no modern replica can truly simulate. By giving these skeptical arguments their full due, we do not weaken the Sunstone theory, we strengthen our inquiry. History at its best is not a courtroom seeking a verdict of guilty or innocent, but a continuous conversation. The skeptics keep the conversation honest, ensuring that our sense of wonder is always tempered by rigorous scrutiny. They remind us that the past is a landscape of shadows, and what we see in those shadows is often shaped by the light we choose to bring. This balanced tension between the elegant possibility of the crystal and the robust reality of traditional skill is where the most authentic understanding lies. It prepares us to ask the final, most speculative question of all. If this knowledge was so precious, what became of it when the world that created it began to fade away? The colonization of Iceland and Greenland stands as the ultimate field test for any theory of Viking navigation. These were not raids or trading runs, but planned mass migrations, a deliberate transplanting of communities across some of the most formidable sea routes in the North Atlantic. The voyage from Norway to Iceland spans roughly 600 miles of open ocean. To reach Greenland from Iceland added another 500 miles across the Denmark Strait, a passage infamous for its drifting ice, dense fog, and brutal storms. These were journeys of no return for many, undertaken with families, livestock, and all the possessions needed to start a new life. Success depended on hitting a specific, often narrow, coastline. Missing Iceland meant vanishing into the vastness of the Atlantic. Missing the scattered fjords of Greenland could mean death on the pack ice. The weather they faced was, and remains, notoriously fickle. Summer could bring weeks of persistent overcast where the sun was a faint, diffused glow behind a ceiling of gray. Sudden fog banks could reduce visibility to a ship's length in minutes. These are precisely the conditions where traditional celestial navigation fails, and where a tool capable of reading polarized light would shift from a convenience to a necessity. Historical accounts of these settlements, like those found in the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, are rich with saga but sparse on technical detail. They speak of drift voyages, of men blown off course, and of others who sailed deliberately out into the deep with a clear destination in mind. The stories that resonate most are those of the purposeful navigators, like the famous settler Ingólfur Arnarson, who cast his high-seat pillars overboard and vowed to build his farm wherever the gods brought them ashore. Yet even this ritualistic act implies a preceding feat, the ability to sail to the general vicinity of Iceland in the first place. Could sunstones have provided the consistent directional control needed for such a deliberate undertaking? Imagine a small fleet setting out from the west coast of Norway. For the first day or two, coastal landmarks might offer guidance, but soon the world shrinks to a circle of gray water under a gray sky. The navigator, perhaps the lead ship's master, now relies on his deep knowledge of the ocean's swell and the prevailing wind. But as days turn into a week, error accumulates. This is the moment for the stone. During a brief lull, he takes a careful bearing, using the crystal to find the sun's hidden azimuth. This reading acts as a reset, correcting the subtle drift that has crept in. He now knows his true east-west line. If his goal was to sail due west from a certain headland, this single check could realign the entire fleet. The journey to Greenland presents an even starker scenario. Leaving Iceland, sailors had to strike a precise northwest course to avoid the deadly ice fields to the north. Holding that bearing under cloud cover for days on end would be a monumental task without a reliable directional reference. A sunstone would not make the voyage easy, but it could make it statistically more survivable. It offered a way to combat the disorientation that fog and overcast impart, a method to maintain group cohesion when ships could not see each other, and most importantly, a technique to turn a hopeful gamble into a repeatable process. Linking the tool to these settlements is speculative, yet powerfully logical. The technological edge it provided might not have been about making a single heroic crossing, but about enabling the sustained two-way traffic that allowed these remote colonies to endure for centuries. It transforms the Sunstone from a curious artifact into a potential keystone of Norse expansion, a quiet innovation that helped write a chapter of human history on the very edge of the known world. The quest for the Sunstone is a story without a final page. While the past holds its secrets close, the future of this search is being written by new technologies that allow us to look with sharper eyes. Advanced mineral analysis offers one promising path forward. Museums around the world hold vast collections of artifacts, many simply labeled as decorative stones or gaming pieces. By subjecting these anonymous crystals to non-destructive spectroscopic scans, researchers could potentially identify pieces of Iceland spar or Cordierite that show subtle signs of human working, perhaps a specific polish from repeated handling or a shape optimized for holding up to the sky. The proof we seek may already be sitting in a drawer, waiting for the right question to be asked. Beneath the waves, another frontier beckons. The cold, dark sediments of the North Atlantic are a remarkable preservative. While no Viking wreck has yet yielded a sunstone, the discovery of the Iceland spar on the Alderney ship proves such finds are possible. Each new shipwreck located, whether a Norse trader or a later vessel, is a potential time capsule. Underwater archaeologists, using remotely operated vehicles and precise excavation techniques, could one day uncover a crystal nestled beside a navigator's personal effects, a direct link between the tool and its user. On land, technologies like LiDAR are revolutionizing site discovery. By scanning dense forest canopies or rugged coastal landscapes from the air, this laser mapping can reveal the faint outlines of longhouses, burial sites, or trading posts invisible from the ground. Each new settlement discovered expands the map of Norse activity and increases the chance of uncovering a context that explains their navigational methods. The laboratory and the open sea remain vital classrooms. Continued experimental work will further refine our understanding of the Sunstone's practical limits. Future studies might use a wider variety of authentic crystal samples under a broader spectrum of real-world conditions, from the pale twilight of an Arctic summer to the deep green gloom beneath a storm front. Collaborations between physicists, historians, and skilled traditional sailors could recreate more accurate voyages, testing not just if a bearing can be taken, but how such information would integrate into the grueling, day-to-day reality of a weeks-long passage. This is not merely about proving a point, it is about reconstructing a lost piece of human cognition. The Sunstone, therefore, remains a live wire in archaeological science. It is a hypothesis that continues to generate compelling research, debate, and exploration. The next big discovery might not be a dramatic, single artifact. It could be a cumulative case built from a dozen tiny clues, a worked crystal here, a suggestive shipwreck context there, all pieced together by technologies that allow us to see what earlier generations could not. The mystery endures not as a failure of history, but as an invitation. It asks us to keep looking, to keep testing, and to remain open to the possibility that the next storm scouring a beach or the next laser pulse scanning a fjord could finally turn the legend into settled fact. The true legacy of the Sunstone is not found in a museum case, but in a mindset. Whether this crystal was a common tool or a master's secret, its story reveals a profound pattern of human innovation. Confronted by a seemingly impossible barrier, the vast and sunless Northern Sea, the Vikings did not simply accept defeat. Instead, they turned a deeper gaze upon the world around them. They asked a different question, not how do we see the sun, but how does the sun make itself known even when hidden? their potential solution emerged not from complex machinery, but from patient observation of a fundamental truth that light itself carries a hidden signature. They then matched that observation with a resource from their own environment, a clear crystal shaped by geological forces. This is innovation in its purest form, a dialogue between a sharp human need and a subtle natural phenomenon. It teaches us that breakthroughs often begin not with invention, but with recognition. The property of polarized light was not created by the Vikings. It was a constant, silent feature of their world, as available to anyone who knew how to look. Their genius, if the theory holds, was in connecting that invisible signal to a life or death problem. They used what they had where they were. Iceland Spar was not a high-tech import. It was a local material whose unique gift was understood and applied. This approach reframes ingenuity. It is less about creating something from nothing and more about perceiving new functions in the ordinary, about reading the familiar world in a revolutionary way. This story invites a quiet reflection on our own relationship with problem solving. In an age of digital complexity, we can sometimes overlook the elegant solutions that exist in plain sight. The Sunstone symbolizes a different path, one built on deep familiarity with one's environment, on patience, and on the willingness to learn nature's subtle language. It reminds us that some of the most powerful tools are those that amplify our natural senses and extend our innate understanding, rather than replacing them entirely. The navigator with his crystal was not outsourcing his judgment to a machine. He was enhancing his own perception to make a critical decision. Ultimately, the Sunstone stands as a testament to human curiosity and resilience. It represents that moment when necessity sparks a deeper look, when survival demands not just bravery, but a new kind of sight. It encourages us to approach our own challenges with the same spirit, to look at our surroundings and ask what hidden patterns or overlooked resources might hold a key. The greatest innovation may not always lie ahead in some distant future, but quietly beside us, waiting for a curious mind to recognize its potential and give it purpose. Knowledge this precious was never written down. In a world where navigation was power, the deepest secrets of the sea were held not in books but in memory. The master navigator, the Latitude, would have passed his craft to a chosen apprentice, often within his own family line, through years of shared voyages. This was knowledge earned through lived experience, taught through story, song, and direct demonstration under the open sky. A young sailor learned the feel of the ocean swell against the hull, long before he was trusted with the subtleties of a crystal's dimming light. The precise alignment for a sunstone bearing, the mental catalogue of shadow lengths for different latitudes at different seasons, the interpretation of a specific seabird's flight, these were layers of understanding built slowly, like the growth rings of an ancient tree. This oral tradition was both its great strength and its fatal vulnerability. It created a living, adaptable library of environmental data, refined across generations. But it also meant that the entire system resided in the minds of a small, elite group of practitioners. The chain of transmission was only as strong as its next link. What happens when that chain is broken? The end of the Viking Age was not a single event, but a slow turning of the societal tide. Raiding gave way to trading, settlement, and integration with Christian Europe. The old seafaring dynasties, whose status was built on open ocean mastery, saw their world change. As the magnetic compass spread through European shipping in the 12th and 13th centuries, it offered a new paradigm, one that was easier to learn, less dependent on lifelong environmental intimacy, and seemingly more democratic. Why spend a decade mastering the faint whispers of polarized light through a crystal, when a magnetized needle could point the way for any literate sailor with a chart? The specialized oral knowledge of the Sunstone and the holistic wayfinding system it supported began to seem like an archaic art. It was not deliberately erased, but gently made obsolete, fading from practical use like a forgotten dialect. This is the silent tragedy of so much ancient innovation. Techniques that were never codified in ink could vanish within a generation or two if the social structures that sustained them shifted. The master dies without the right apprentice, a community disperses, a new technology offers a simpler path. The knowledge simply evaporates, leaving behind only the ghost of its existence, a tantalizing mention in a saga that later readers struggle to understand. The story of the Solarstein becomes a powerful metaphor for all the lost arts of the ancient world, the concrete recipes, the metallurgical secrets, the architectural techniques that died with their last practitioners. We are left sifting through folklore and fragmented archaeology, trying to reconstruct a symphony from a few scattered notes. The sagas that preserved the word were not technical manuals, they were echoes. They captured the memory of a tool's existence, but not the precise manual for its use. That lived knowledge, the intimate conversation between the navigator, the crystal, and the sky, sailed into the mist and never returned. It reminds us that history is not just what was built or written, but also what was remembered and then quietly forgotten. The physics that might have guided a longship is now embedded in the cockpit of a modern jet. Polarized light navigation, the core principle behind the Sunstone, is far from a forgotten art. It is a sophisticated tool in contemporary science and engineering. This ancient method of reading the sky's hidden patterns has found new life in the 21st century, creating a direct and remarkable bridge between Viking mariners and today's innovators. Advanced aircraft, for instance, sometimes employ polarization-sensitive instruments as a backup navigation system. In certain conditions, these sensors can detect the polarization pattern in the sky to determine the sun's position, offering a reliable, non-electronic reference point if primary systems were ever compromised. It is a space-age echo of the Viking technique, using the same natural phenomenon to solve a similar problem, maintaining orientation when other guides fail. Beyond aviation, researchers are exploring how polarized light cues can enhance satellite navigation systems, especially in challenging environments where signals might be weak or obstructed. The study of this ancient principle even extends into the microscopic world. Consider the humble honeybee. Foraging bees use specialized eyes to detect the polarization patterns in blue sky, allowing them to navigate back to their hive with astonishing accuracy, even on partly cloudy days. They are living proof of a biological sky compass, a system refined by millions of years of evolution. Scientists now closely study these and other animals, like certain species of ants and beetles, to understand the mechanics of their polarization sensitivity. This field, known as bio-inspired design, aims to reverse engineer nature's solutions. By deciphering how a bee's eye processes polarized light, engineers can develop tiny, low-power sensors for autonomous robots or drones. These robotic sensors could navigate complex environments without relying on heavy satellite data, using instead the subtle, ever-present map written in sunlight, just as a navigator might have centuries ago. This continuum of knowledge is profoundly elegant. The Viking Sunstone, whether a common tool or a master's secret, represents humanity's early, conscious attempt to harness this invisible law of nature. Today, that same law guides both animal instinct and human invention. It reminds us that some of the most powerful technologies are not those that conquer nature, but those that learn to speak its silent language, translating ancient patterns into new forms of guidance. The story of the Sunstone, therefore, is not locked in the past. It is a chapter in an ongoing discovery, a testament to the enduring power of observing the fundamental truths hidden in plain sight. The crystal arrived in a small padded envelope, a piece of Iceland spar about the size of a sugar cube. It felt cool and surprisingly heavy in my palm. a translucent rhomboid with sharp, clean edges that fractured the light from the window into twin images of everything behind it. This was the object of so much speculation, now a tangible weight in my hand. My goal was simple: to follow the instructions from those research papers and try to see the hidden sun for myself. The first step was finding the right sky, not a clear blue day, but a thick, uniform overcast. I waited for a morning when the clouds were a solid gray ceiling, the sun completely erased from view. Standing in an open field, I held the crystal up to the sky, just as the ancient texts and modern experiments described. I began to slowly rotate it, peering through its clear depth, searching for that legendary dimming. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. The view through the stone was just a lighter gray, then a darker gray, a shift I could easily attribute to the changing thickness of the cloud layer or my own imagination. It was frustrating. The theory was so elegant, but the practice felt utterly subjective, like trying to hear a whisper in a windstorm. I wondered if this was where the legend met reality, a beautiful idea that simply did not work in the clumsy hands of a modern amateur. But I kept turning the stone, forcing myself to slow down, to make each rotation a full, deliberate circle. And then, on what felt like the 100th turn, I saw it. Or rather, I felt it. At one specific angle, the gray view through the crystal did not just get darker, it seemed to snap into a deeper, more uniform shadow. It was a subtle effect, more of an impression than a dramatic change, but it was repeatable. Rotate away from that spot, and the gray lightened. Rotate back, and that distinct dimming returned. That precise point felt like a discovery. Using a simple compass app on my phone as a rough check, the direction aligned almost perfectly with where the sun was calculated to be behind the clouds. In that moment, the centuries collapsed. This was not about proving a historical fact. It was about experiencing a potential moment of clarity. The frustration melted away into a quiet sense of connection. I was not a Viking navigator. My life did not depend on this reading, but for an instant I could glimpse the process. It was a delicate, demanding skill, one that required patience and a trust in subtlety over certainty. The awe came not from a magical revelation, but from the realization that this simple interaction with light, this quiet observation, could indeed form the basis of a survival technology. It transformed the Sunstone from a topic in a book into a key that unlocked a different way of seeing. Engaging with the past became an active, physical dialogue, a reminder that some forms of knowledge are not just understood with the mind, but felt in the hand and seen with a newly trained eye. This hands-on pursuit makes the theoretical vividly real, suggesting that the true mystery may not be whether they used the stone, but in the profound quiet of concentration it demanded from those who did. That small piece of Iceland spar in my hand was a key to a different kind of history. It is a history not of certainties, but of compelling possibilities, where the line between legend and invention blurs into something far more interesting. The Viking Sunstone endures as one of our most captivating enigmas, a perfect fusion of saga, science, and sheer human daring. We have traced its path from a single word in an ancient text to the complex physics of polarized light, from the controlled environment of a modern laboratory to the heaving deck of a longship. The search has taken us across disciplines and centuries, revealing not a simple answer, but a profound question about how we understand the past. While a definitive artifact may never emerge from the soil or the sea, the cumulative weight of the evidence builds a powerful case. It paints a portrait of a plausible and brilliant technology, born not in a workshop, but from generations of intimate, patient observation of the natural world. The Vikings did not invent polarized light. They learned to listen to its whispers. They matched a subtle environmental signal with a material their world provided, turning a simple crystal into a potential window through the gloom. This story is about more than navigation. It is about a mindset. The Sunstone, in all its elusive mystery, comes to symbolize the core of the Viking spirit, relentless, adaptable, and masterfully pragmatic in the face of the terrifying unknown. It represents their refusal to be bound by the limitations of their senses, their drive to find a fixed point in the chaos of sea and sky. This legacy challenges us in quiet ways. It asks us to re-examine the intellectual and technological capabilities of ancient peoples, to look beyond our assumptions about what was possible. Their achievements were not accidents. They were the products of sophisticated knowledge systems, most of which were never written down, but carried in memory and muscle until they faded from use. The Sunstone's disappearance is a poignant reminder of how fragile such oral, experiential knowledge can be, vanishing when the world that needed it changes shape. Yet its story is also an invitation to keep searching, to keep asking questions with both curiosity and rigor. Every new shipwreck discovered, every advanced mineral scan of an anonymous artifact, every field test on the open water brings us closer to understanding. The enigma itself is the gift, a perpetual spark for our imagination and our scholarship. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing conversation, and that the next great discovery might just be waiting for someone to look at an old problem or an old crystal in a brilliant new light. If this journey through myth and science resonated with you, we would love to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts on the Sunstone's plausibility in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest historical mysteries.